And I'm going to introduce you to Rebekka Hutton, who is a pickle maker and owner of Alchemy Pickle Company. And she has over 15 years of experience in the hospitality industry and extensive experience in tourism, nonprofit, and environmental sectors. She has so much knowledge about sustainable, healthy food and is part of the grow good food movement that I think is taking over the whole country, especially during the pandemic. So she's built a food business that draws people who want to learn more about what they put onto their plate and into their bodies, really. If you want to learn more about the Alchemy Pickle Company, you can visit their websites, alchemypicklecompany.ca. That's pretty easy. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Rebekka, and we're going to have a demo. And if the sound doesn't work, then we'll deal with that. But we're going to hope that it's all going to work. Take it away.
Okay, great. Hello. Thanks so much for having me. This is really an excellent evening. I'm excited to have the science nerd explaining the things that we do every day. So today we're going to make a sauerkraut, but I just want to talk a little bit about what fermentation is from a non-science person. So fermenting foods used for us, for our purposes, we're using salt to inhibit bad bacteria and create a good environment for the good bacteria. So the probiotics that are going into the food preserve the ferment, and they provide that sour taste that you're familiar with in your sauerkraut or your sour pickle. They encourage they make the nutrition more bioavailable to you, as Amy is talking about with the fermentation of corn, so that your body is able to digest more of the nutrients, and you get also many layers of flavor from those probiotics from the fermentation. Okay, so I started Alchemy 9 years ago. We ferment local organic produce in Toronto. We sell at farmers markets and retailers all throughout Southern Ontario. We make about 30 different products, but sauerkraut is our mainstay. We've got a couple of photos of that's our kombucha. I saw the next slide was maybe a cabbage patch, perhaps. This was just on Monday. We took our team out to Sosnicki's Organic Farm. This is where we get most of our cabbages from, so we got to actually be right in the patch where the cabbages are coming from, which is super fun. I don't know if there's more photos for us to look at. There's a classic sour dill cucumber pickles, always very popular, limited supply. It's challenging to get certified organic vegetables that are kind of ideal for what we're doing in Ontario. So we cherish every pickle we make. There's the cabbage. We're going to be doing that in just a few minutes. And that's our curtido. That's a carrot, onion, and cabbage sauerkraut. I've got something kind of similar we're going to look at in a second. That's the kimchi in jars. So we make a regional kimchi using all local produce. And yeah, that's that. So why do we want to have fermented vegetables? So we're building up layers of flavor. Essentially, we're adding salt to the cabbage. We're going to do that. Then layers or communities of bacteria are going to come in and make the lower the pH and make the sour flavors. So as the acidity goes down, we're having new communities of bacteria coming in, and so when it finally reaches its final pH, which is about, you could say about 3, that's going to provide the natural preservation and all the flavors in there. So then we need to refrigerate it. We're not heating anything. We're not pasteurizing. It is challenging as a food business because the retailers, as Amy mentioned, do want a longer shelf life, but there's also, we also need to compromise. We want all of the health benefits. So nothing is pasteurized here. We're not using any vinegar. And I feel like the vinegar versus fermentation question is something that comes up a lot. Most people just get your Bix pickle in the supermarket. That's a vinegar pickle. It's heated, and then it's shelf stable. Whereas fermented products are using salt and maybe water in a salt brine, and then they're fermented at room temperature or slightly cooler depending on where you live. And then they're stored in the fridge until you're ready to eat them. So it's not preserving it forever. It's preserving it for flavor and fixing your harvest season. So the components that we are always looking at are salt. So I recommend using just an unrefined sea salt. Nothing like a table salt. You don't want any additives in your salt. I like a coarse salt, so something that hasn't been processed very much. Then we have water. In some cases, your dill pickles would have water and salt brine. For the sauerkraut, we're not going to add water. Everything you need for the sauerkraut is already on the outside or within the cabbage. And then we're looking at temperature. So the microbes that we're creating an environment for them to live in love like about 18 degrees. We have a fermentation stage that's between 18 and 20 degrees. You can ferment at higher or lower temperatures. It's going to change the flavor profile and possibly the texture of your sauerkraut. Other variables are your vegetables. So if you're using a vegetable that is firm, that's harvested in cooler weather, it's going to store a lot longer than a vegetable that's harvested in the summer, like a cucumber. It's going to be softer. It's not going to store as long. It also depends on how you're cutting up your vegetables. Smaller cuts are going to ferment faster. Larger cuts are going to ferment slower. You're going to have a texture change. So we put some of those suggestions in the comments if you are thinking about how to cut up your sauerkraut. We use a much thicker cut, a 4mm cut for the sauerkraut here, so that it stays crunchy for a longer period of time. It's also just a personal preference. You may want different slices for different times of the year or different vegetables. And then time. So you're balancing the amount of salt, the type of vegetable, the temperature you're fermenting at, and then how long you're fermenting at. So it really depends on your environment. If it's warmer, you have a shorter time. If it's cooler, it will take a longer time. So I always recommend to people who are starting out, just taste your ferment as you're going along, and then you can see how the flavor will change over time, and just decide when you think it's done. And it's done when it tastes sour, you like the texture, it's got good flavor. You will reach a point in your fermentation journey that you can just taste it and you know, okay, that's good, that's done. Other things to consider are the methods of fermentation. So there's a couple of different methods, which I mentioned, involving water. So we either have the dry salt method, which is what we're going to use for the sauerkraut, or you have a salt brine method, which is what you would use for a dill pickle. And then there are other methods where you might have a culture added to a beverage. For example, like a sweet kvass might have some starter culture, or a kombucha has a culture that's added to the beverage. Okay, so today I've got a couple of different sauerkrauts on the go here. I made one just a couple hours ago. This is a red and green cabbage. There's about maybe 4.5 pounds of cabbage in this. This is a 2-liter jar. And then I've got a green cabbage with some grated carrots and some sliced red jalapenos. This is about 1/2 cabbage. My cabbages today were about 3 pounds. It's like an average cabbage size, 3 pounds or 1,300 grams. I like to use grams because it's easier to calculate the percentage of salt. So one question that came up earlier was, how do you cut up a cabbage for sauerkraut? It really is up to you. You could use a mandolin, you could use a food processor, you can cut them by hand. So I'm just gonna cut this cabbage up so we can see. Normally here we would use a food processor, but if you don't have one, that's totally fine. So I just cut the stem off, and I'm gonna remove the outer leaves. You can save those leaves to use as weight for your kraut later. And then I just cut it in half, and then cut it into quarters. And I'm just gonna take this core off. So you've got your cabbage with no core. The core can be quite bitter. We're going to talk about the crucido sauerkraut again in one sec. Someone was asking a question about it. So you've got your quarters, you cut the core off, and then you can just slice it. So you could slice super thin, super thick, whatever you like. And then we probably should talk about flavoring. So sometimes I like just having a plain sauerkraut because you can put that with everything. Or you can flavor it with really anything you can think of. If you wanted to put garlic, you could blend a couple of garlic cloves into a paste with your salt and then mix it into your sauerkraut. You could add chunks of garlic. You could add dried spices, some chili flakes. You could add dill seed or cumin seed or thyme and oregano, maybe. Peppercorns, juniper is a popular one. You could make smoked paprika or cayenne pepper. Really anything you can think of. The world is your oyster for sauerkraut. Okay, so someone mentioned they were wondering about the crucido sauerkraut. So I made this one earlier. So this is 1/2 cabbage. It's 1 carrot and a little bit of jalapeno. And you can see the liquid from the cabbage has come out just from the salt, just mixing it with salt. We're not pounding it or massaging it too much. The cool thing about salt is that it just draws out the moisture from the vegetables and makes a self-brine just all by itself. You don't need to expend a lot of energy, although some people do like to do that, and it can help if you're frustrated about something. So the crucido that we make is carrots, onions, and cabbage, and then oregano, thyme, and chili flakes. So that's just a taste. You can try out an amount of herbs and spices with your kraut, and then when it's ready, just adjust. I recommend writing down what you're making so that the next time you make it, you can change your recipe to more to your liking. So the magical percentage for sauerkraut, in my opinion, is 2%. So you're going to weigh your cabbage, and calculate 2% of the weight of that cabbage. So these cabbages are 1,300 grams, so we want to use 26 grams of salt. If you don't have a scale, that's okay. Average cabbage plus 2 tablespoons of coarse salt should do the trick. Again, you can try that, and then if it's too salty or not salty enough, then you can change that the next time you make it. So I'm just going to sprinkle the salt onto the cabbage, and then I'm just going to mix it together. So if you're at home with your cabbage, I know there are a few photos on Twitter of people who were getting their cabbages ready. So I'm literally just mixing that in, and I'm going to set it aside, and in about half an hour, there's going to be the juice from that cabbage coming out, and that's going to help us protect the ferment while it's fermenting. And that's really it. So I'm just going to see if there is any questions. Nope. Okay. So I'm going to skip ahead to the one I made earlier. And I'm just going to put this half cabbage into a 1-liter mason jar. So you can use really any glass container, or if you have a pottery container. I prefer not to ferment in plastic because I think that the plastic absorbs the smell and it could potentially leach into your ferment. But really, whatever you have is great. So this is a 2-liter jar. This is what I used for my red and green cabbage that I made earlier. This is 2 cabbages roughly. So 1 cabbage roughly would fit in a 1-liter jar. So I'm just gonna grab this. You can see how much liquid is coming out of it. I don't know if you can see that actually. Yeah, there you go. So that's all just from the cabbage. I haven't added some other liquid. You want to put about half of it in and then pack it down so that you have no air. So I don't know if you can see, when you push down, you can actually see the liquid rising up, and that's what you want. You want all the air holes to be filled with liquid. So then we've got a little bit of space. It's good to have space in the top because as this starts fermenting, it's going to be especially active in the first 3 days. Again, depending on what temperature your room is. If it's hotter, it's going to be faster. If it's below 15, it's going to be quite slow. So I'm just pushing everything down so it's all together. I'm going to tuck everything in. And then there's several different things you can do at this stage. Where did I get the funnel? Lee Valley. You can get amazing canning equipment at Lee Valley. But I think also any restaurant supply store would have these. So I showed you you could save your cabbage leaf from earlier. So you can just fold that up if you have one and tuck it in. So what we basically want to do is protect your ferment from the air. Anything in the air could cause it to mold. So this is kind of like a sacrifice leaf. It may get moldy and then you just throw it out. Alternatively, you could use, there are clear glass weights you can buy that are just for pickling, for fermenting, little ones. Something that's going to hold this down. Or you can get another jar that fits into the mouth of the jar and just push that down and see all the liquid in there. So whatever method you're using is absolutely fine. Just make sure that it's clean. And then I would just cover this with a tea towel like I've done here. Just take the lid off of this one. So here's, you can see all of that brine right up at the top. And I just put a little mason jar in the mouth of this jar so that there is no extra space at the top. And then I'm just covering the whole thing so that no fruit flies and dust come inside. I recommend labeling it with a name and the date so that you can remember what you made and when you made it. So I think we could probably open up to questions if anyone has any.
I have one. So
Okay.
when you salted the cabbage, so you left that one that you just put in the jar, you left it for like 2 hours?
Yeah, maybe an hour and a half. Yeah.
So do you use time, or do you say, okay, it's got a certain amount of liquid in it already?
What I like to tell folks whenever we do workshops in person is, like, you can see this one, which I just did, is already getting, you can see it getting shiny, just from like a few minutes. So that's the salt starting to work on the cabbage. Once you can see moisture or water in the bottom of the bowl, or if you squeeze it and you can see it dripping out, then you're good. But you will see the texture of the cabbage kind of transform over that half an hour to an hour. It will actually get softer, it will change color. That's what you're looking for, because in this stage, if you packed it in to the jar, there's no moisture. There's not enough moisture to fill in all those little gaps, and you really don't want to have any air inside your jar because you're trying to protect it from the thaw.
Right. So you need to have some moisture so that you can fill that up. I get that. That's really cool. Yeah. Also, you kind of blew my mind, Rebekka, because I never knew that Bics pickles weren't fermented. I just they were, but they're just vinegar. You're right.
Yeah.
That's the same. Well, interesting.